Hello and welcome to News Central Television. I am Lekan, Onabanjo. Here are the stories making headlines beyond the continent. And we begin in America, where an earthquake shook the densely populated New York City metropolitan area on Friday morning, with residents reporting they felt rumbling across the northeast. The U.S. Geological Survey reported a quake with a preliminary magnitude of 4.7 centered near Lebanon, New Jersey, or about 45 miles west of New York City and 50 miles north of Philadelphia. The fire departments of New York said there were no initial reports of damage. The shaking stirred memories of the August 23, 2011 earthquake that jolted tens of millions of people from Georgia to Canada. Registering magnitude 5.8, it was the strongest quake to hit the East Coast since World War II. The epicenter was in Virginia. That earthquake left cracks in the Washington Monument, spurred evacuation of the White House and Capitol, and rattled New Yorkers 3 weeks before the 10th anniversary of the September 11 terror attacks. Now, joining us to give a bit of more insight to this story is our international correspondent, Afua Hagan. Now, Afua, what has been the reaction of residents that actually took in this earthquake?
Put into context how big this earthquake was. Earlier on in the week, we had an earthquake in Taiwan, which measured about 7 to 8 in magnitude. Anything above 7 is measured, when it's measured, is considered a serious major earthquake. Now, this was under 5 on the scale, according to the U.S. Geological Society, 4.7 earthquake. So not particularly serious, but it was serious enough for people to catch it on their Ring doorbells or while they were making TikToks, and cracks have appeared in roads, things like that. And the shaking, like we said, was felt as far away as Boston and Philadelphia. So not a major earthquake by any way, shape, or form, but definitely a significant event, the most major earthquake in this part of the world, in this part of the United States, for 40 years. Now, in response to this earthquake, several of the airports in the area, including Newark and JFK, grounded flights because of the effects of the earthquake. Delays were also reported at LaGuardia, but it's thought those restrictions on the earthquakes have been lifted, and flights are landing and taking off at the moment. And those flights were paused to assess damage at runways and at the airport infrastructure, and obviously making sure that there's no debris also on the runway.
For the statements of the New York state officials as regards the earthquake.
Well, as you saw there in those pictures, the shaking was felt at the UN, at the United Nations headquarters in New York. They were in the middle of a debate about the Israel-Palestine war. New York Governor Kathy Hochul has stressed the seriousness of the quake, but said that there's no life-threatening situations identified as yet, but they will be reviewing the infrastructure of New York. The mayor, Eric Adams, has also said that the city's first responders are working to make sure New Yorkers are safe. And at this point, they don't have any reports of major impacts or injuries. He did go on to give some safety advice, and he said, "I encourage all New Yorkers to check on your loved ones. And if you feel an aftershock, drop to the floor, cover your head and neck, and take cover under a solid piece of furniture next to an interior wall or in a doorway." And critical inspections of infrastructure are underway at the moment.
Take the last question, Afua. Let's quickly look at the visuals of the reports, that I'll come back to take your reaction.
I nervous and shaky. Oh my God, say, holy moly. Oh my goodness, it never happened here. I say, New York. Wow. Many people it is so scared right now.
We were just sitting eating bagels, and we felt a big shake, and we thought it was the subway. And then our friends started texting us, and they were like, "Did you feel the earthquake?" And yeah, it wasn't that big of a deal, but yeah.
It wasn't even a big shake.
Yeah.
Just a little.
I literally thought it was just
little bump.
We saw the buildings moving and everything, though. It was kind of scary, but yeah.
Good, I'm okay, it's fun.
It's fine as long as it doesn't go too far, you know, which I thought in our area it's not a big seismic area, so it's okay. So it should be okay. We have bigger problems in the world. Let's put it this way. Yeah?
The table. I enjoyed the shaking. I was not fearful. I said, whatever comes, comes. And now I'm curious. I hope the bridges are okay and, you know, everybody. But you can't stop Mother Nature. And
via my apartment, I'm ready to go out. When I'm feeling moving, I say, oh, what happened? I think so it's train, but I say, no, I don't hear the train running. I say, oh my God, it's her Buddha. I'm so scared. I call my sister and then my hands, everybody is scared, everybody. I go to the window, say, oh my God, what's the people? People are scared.
Well, Afua, you just saw a couple of residents there saying that some of them said they were scared, others said they were unsurprised, unperturbed by the earthquake that happened in their area. So tell me, how would you describe their predisposition to this tremor, and how common are earthquakes in that part of the United States?
Well, one of the people there in your Vox Pop said it rightly, that the New York area isn't a huge seismic area. That's actually the other side of the United States on the West Coast, of course, around California, which is much more of a bigger seismic area. They have had huge earthquakes in the past. And actually, to be honest, they are due to have another one. They haven't had a big one for a long time, and because of the way that the plates shift and the geology in that area, they are due actually to have a huge earthquake. And the West Coast is much more used to this kind of seismic activity. It's quite rare on the East Coast. It's the biggest earthquake for 40 years. The last tremor was felt in 2011, and again, you know, it wasn't above 7. Anything above 7 is considered a big earthquake, a major earthquake. This was 4.8. They don't really have anything above 5 in this area. So of course, New Yorkers, there's a steely bunch, unperturbed by the shaking. But like I said, it's not very common in this part of the world. That's more to the west coast of the United States.
Afua, again, thank you so much for your time. Moving on now. Janet Yellen, during a visit to China, warns that there is concern among several countries that Beijing's production overcapacity is now really growing as a threat and could push companies in industries such as EVs, batteries, solar out of business because of artificially cheap exports from the East Asian giants. Yellen also kicked off her first day of talks with Vice Premier Lekan, seen as one of Beijing's most powerful economic policymakers, who said it could look forward to further discussions on global economy policy.
我们这次的会面主要任务就是要落实两国元首会晤和通话达成的重要共识，进一步深入讨论中美以及全球经济金融领域的重要问题，并且就中美经济关系中的一些重点关切作出妥善的回应。希望双方在旧金山会谈的基础上取得新的互利共赢的成果，为两国企业创造良好的投资环境，更好地造福两国乃至世界人民。
I've heard from several foreign counterparts who are concerned that overcapacity is now really growing as a threat, and they share lessons we learned from past episodes where there was Chinese overcapacity, and they're really quite determined to make sure that their industries, particularly EVs, batteries, solar, do not go out of business because of artificially cheap exports from China. And I guess I'd like to underscore that our concern with overcapacity, this is not anti-China policy. It's an effort for us to mitigate the risks from the inevitable global economic dislocation that will result if China doesn't adjust its policies.
And I'll tell you that the Electoral Supreme Court of Panama has started to print, stock, and send ballot papers nationwide for the general election on May 5, when the country will elect a new president. Ex-President Ricardo Martinelli was banned from running in the 2024 general election. The court declared him ineligible earlier this month, citing his inability to run due to a nearly 11-year prison sentence for money laundering. Panama's constitution bars anyone sentenced to a prison term of 5 years or more from serving as president. The electoral court said his running mate, Jose Raul Molino, will appear in the ballots as presidential candidate for the Martinelli's political party. In Europe, French President Emmanuel Macron said on Friday that schools should be protected from a form of uninhibited violence among some youths after 2 violent assaults against teenagers in recent days. Both incidents came at a time of heightened tensions around French schools after threats of attacks were sent to dozens of schools via an internal messaging system. Macron spoke after a 15-year-old teenager was badly beaten on Thursday near a school in a town south of Paris and rushed to hospital following a cardiac arrest. It was the second of such assaults this week after a 13-year-old girl was left temporarily comatose after being beaten outside a school in the southern city of Montpellier on Tuesday.
De plus en plus violente, et on a une forme de violence désinhibée chez nos adolescents et parfois de plus en plus jeunes. Alors il faut protéger l'école de ça, mais la question c'est comment on le prévient beaucoup mieux. C'est ce que j'avais évoqué au moment des émeutes. Il y a plusieurs facteurs à ce qui est en train de se passer. On a d'abord de plus en plus de problèmes.
And also, I will tell you that Poland has demanded a criminal inquiry by Israel after what is called the murder of 7 food charity workers, including a Polish citizen in a Gaza airstrike this week. Deputy Foreign Minister Andrzej Szejna says prosecutors should be added and implicated in the explanations and in the entire criminal and disciplinary procedure for the soldiers responsible for the murder. He made the statement after Israel's Warsaw envoy was summoned and issued a formal protest over the strike on the World Central Kitchen workers.
W wyjaśnianiu i w całej procedurze karnej oraz dyscyplinarnej wobec żołnierzy, którzy są odpowiedzialni za to, nazwijmy konkretnie jeszcze raz, morderstwo, była dopuszczona i brała udział prokuratura okręgowa w Przemyślu, ponieważ mamy tu do czynienia z artykułem 148 kodeksu karnego, czyli zabójstwo z użyciem...
You're watching Beyond the Continent. A break will do here. When we return, more stories will follow. Don't go away. We continue with the stories now. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has expressed serious concerns over reports that Israel is using artificial intelligence to identify targets in Gaza. Guterres tells reporters that he is deeply troubled by reports that Israeli military's bombing campaign includes artificial intelligence as a tool in the identification of targets, particularly in densely populated residential areas, resulting in a high level of civilian casualties. He said no part of life and death decisions which impact entire families should be delegated to the cold calculation of algorithms.
I'm also deeply troubled by reports that the Israeli military's bombing campaign includes artificial intelligence as a tool in the identification of targets, particularly in densely populated residential areas, resulting in a high level of civilian casualties. No part of life and death decisions which impact entire families should be delegated to the cold calculation.
Now, the Israeli military dismissed 2 officers and formally reprimanded senior commanders after an inquiry into the killing of 7 aid workers in an airstrike in Gaza this week, which found serious errors and breaches of procedure. The inquiry found Israeli forces mistakenly believed they were attacking Hamas gunmen when drone strikes hit the 3 vehicles of the World Central Kitchen Aid Group late on Monday night, and that standard procedures had not been followed. Now, this time to discuss this, I'm now being joined by Bolu Michael B., who is a foreign policy analyst. Bolu, thank you so much for joining us on the news.
Pleasure.
So how do you assess the impact of Israel's military's dismissal of 2 officers and the reprimand of senior commanders on the broader Israeli military strategy in Gaza?
Well, the dismissal of these officers is a subtle admittance errors because there's a clear breach of international humanitarian law. And this grossly affects the perception of Israel's competence and their role and proportionality in this war. And on the flip side, it also affects Israeli officers in a way because their morale might or confidence might go down. But it also has this, it could also have a positive impact in the sense that they'll be more careful in their approach in targeting, opposition.
So in light of the inquiry findings, what measures do you believe should be taken to prevent similar errors and breaches of procedure in future military operations?
Well, they need to first of all, assess the situation, investigate and see where things went wrong. As oftentimes it's either that the personnel was not well trained in that particular assignment, or they didn't get the appropriate intelligence, or they're using substandard technology, or there's a breach in communication between the personnel on ground or those in the area unit. So they must first of all assess where things went wrong, but it's oftentimes traced to one or more of the four things I've listed. And when they identify what the challenge exactly is, they can begin to focus on. If it's the training, they get a qualified person. If it's technology, they get the proper technology that can assist in aerial vision and things like that.
Well, of course, according to reports, there were drone strike errors, and the UN Secretary General, that is Antonio Guterres, accused Israel of using artificial intelligence. So that could mean possibly there's a connection between the kind of intelligence that would use there. But then does that speak to the desperation of the IDF to want to, in as much as possible, exterminate certain elements that they consider as threats?
Yeah, one begins to question the role of Israel in the war and why they're seeking, they might be seeking total annihilation, which is not a good thing. And the AI, they're not perfect. There's no particular technology or even medical science that is 100% accurate. Sometimes they're subject to hallucinations. Sometimes they're subject to some form of error here and there. So relying on artificial intelligence does not guarantee automatic or perfect result, and that's what they're paying for right now. And I believe one way or the other, they must have learned from it.
So how might this incident affect international perceptions of Israel's military actions in Gaza? Because we know that a lot of their international partners have made calls, international institutions have also made calls for them to rein in the soldiers and try as much as possible to embrace a truce and a ceasefire. But then we don't see that happening in Israel. And of course, the Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, still coming out to say that they will go on to carry on their crusade against those they perceive as militants, that is Hamas, in the Gaza Strip. Now, do you think that is a problem in terms of how they will be perceived post this war?
Yeah, but they'll be perceived, they've already seen a lot of condemnation, and that, suggests the mind frame or the perception, what the international community thinks about the error. It does affect Israel's reputation in a negative light, because not today they've been fighting wars, and the kind of assistance in terms of personnel and training and technology that they receive, specifically from the United States, it's quite it's unexpected that they'll be making this kind of error. One would almost think that it's a deliberate effort, so it rubs off on them negative light. And persons that have been tolerant about Israel's approach to the war, this might just be that incident that breaks the camel back. Unfortunately, it might hinder humanitarian assistance from international organizations and countries, because the loss of one humanitarian aid officer is one too many, and that would affect putting more resources or men on the field out there. So it just rubs off on Israel negatively, and it's important for them to come out and assure the world that the lives of not just civilians but also humanitarian aid officers are safe.
Against Israeli assurances, are there other steps that at this point you think can be taken to ensure the safety and protection of humanitarian organization personnel and civilians who are not even in any way part of this military expedition or militancy in the Gaza Strip?
Yeah, the mistake kind of highlights the human cost of conflict, unfortunately. And, when they sit down and they see where things went wrong in this the first step towards ensuring the safety of the civilians. If it's the technology that was the issue, they should get better technology. If it's training, they should get more trained officers. If it's the communication error between area units and those on ground, they need to enhance that. That way, they're ensuring the lives and safety and giving free, access to humanitarian aid officers without feeling at risk. They need to actually come out and tell the world what they have done. They've admitted, which is good, that they were wrong. They now need to come out to the world and assure them and assure the rest of the international community that they're committed to the safety of humanitarian aid officers and also civilians, and tell the world the steps they have taken or they intend to take to make that happen. And it just calls for the need for dialogue, reconciliation, and recognition of historical grievances between parties, and the need to sit down and talk and settle issues from the root cause.
Bulu Michael B., thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
Okay, now moving on, thousands of schools in the Philippines suspended in-person classes on Friday, the Education Department said, as part of the tropical country endured dangerously high temperatures. Official figures showed 5,288 schools across the archipelago nation switched to remote learning, affecting more than 3.6 million students. The months of March, April, and May are typically the hottest and driest in the archipelago nation, but conditions have been exacerbated by the El Nino weather phenomenon. And that's all at this hour. Don't forget to send your eyewitness reports to the WhatsApp number and email on your screen. And you can follow us on social media. We are at News Central TV. You can also watch News Central live on DSTV channel 422, Star Times channel 274, Avo TV, and YouTube. Many thanks for watching. I am Lekan Onabanjo.